World War II, a conflict that reshaped the globe, was riddled with alliances that would forever alter the course of history. Yet beneath the surface of military pacts and political agreements lay a shadowy partnership that few dare to speak of, a clandestine accord between the Nazis and the Vatican. This unholy alliance, wrapped in secrecy and controversy, challenges what we thought we knew about the war's moral dichotomies. While the world was engulfed in the flames of warfare, behind the closed doors of the Vatican City, an intricate dance of diplomacy and deceit was being choreographed with Hitler's Germany. The Vatican, a beacon of spiritual guidance, found itself entangled in a moral quandary, negotiating with a regime whose atrocities would stain the pages of history. In 1933, the Reichskonkordat pact was signed, sealing a controversial agreement that would link Hitler's regime with the spiritual leadership of millions of Catholics around the world. This alliance, shrouded in a veil of necessity and survival, raises questions about complicity, resistance, and the price of power in times of turmoil. The repercussions of this pact would echo through history, casting long shadows over the Vatican's role during one of humanity's darkest chapters. Today we delve into one of the Catholic Church's most controversial chapters, the chilling silence during the rise of Nazism, and the murky whispers of rat lines aiding war criminals to escape justice. This is not a tale of easy answers, but rather a walk through the misty alleys of history, where faith confronted fascism in a struggle for both souls and empires, and didn't often win. For over a millennium, the Catholic Church has stood as a beacon of hope, fostering art, culture, and acts of extraordinary charity. Yet, like any institution born under the weight of centuries, it carries deep shadows alongside its shining deeds, running hospitals, feeding and clothing people experiencing poverty, helping turn around the lives of countless millions of lost souls. The Catholic Church has done great good in the world. But, from exploiting native populations during the Age of Discovery to its tangled web of political alliances and the scandals of the 20th and 21st centuries, the Church's history whispers stories of power, intrigue, and moral and economic corruption. On top of a long list of things that the Catholic Church hierarchy would rather have people forget is their relationship with the Nazis, especially at the end of the war and in the years immediately after, when confronted in the 60s and 70s about the more and more common news articles that asserted that many in the Church hierarchy either helped Nazi war criminals escape justice or turned a blind eye to their crimes. The Nazis' crimes were not unknown to the Pope or his cardinals in Rome. The Pope had been told about it in detail. What's more, many Catholic clergy in the regions under Nazi control had been subject to persecution. But, as Stalin once said before the war when asked if he was worried about the Pope's reaction to the persecution of Catholics in the Soviet Union, "The Pope? How many divisions does he have?" The answer to that question was obviously none. And Hitler knew that too. So did Pope Pius XII, Pope from 1939 to 1958, who had to walk a careful line between his beliefs on one side and Hitler on the other. All too often, Hitler won. Hitler comes to power. Germany was the birthplace of the Protestant Reformation, and in the 100 or so years after Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses and criticisms of the Church in 1517, the many states that would become Germany were divided. Most people in the north converted to Protestantism, while most of the people in the south remained Catholic. The 30 Years' War began in 1618 and was a savage conflict fought mainly in the lands that became a united Germany in 1871. No one is sure, but historians put the number of people killed in the war or who died from its effects at between 4 to 8 million people. The war involved not only Germany, but the lands of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, into which Hitler was born in 1889. Most Austrians and most of the people in the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire were Catholic, including Alois and Clara Hitler, Adolf's parents. Though it's still debated, It's likely that Hitler, like most Christian children in Austria at the time, was made to go to church regularly. It's even believed that he was an altar boy for a short time before being told to go home or quit himself. The schools he attended were built, financed, and run by the Benedictines, a strict order of monks and sometimes priests, along with the infamously strict nuns from the female monastic orders who taught and in many cases ran the schools run by the order and the church. It's not hard to see how someone like Hitler came to hate the Catholic Church. Not inclined to take orders from anyone, including the strict father who often beat him when he disobeyed, Hitler came to despise what he saw as the weakness of the Catholic Church and Christianity in general. The turn the other cheek part of the Sermon on the Mount was also not a Nazi favorite. Helping the sick and others too weak or simple-minded to survive on their own was something the Catholic Church did and generally does well all over the world. But helping what Hitler and his cronies later called useless mouths was not something the future Führer, educating himself on the letting the strong survive part of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, could support. In 1929, 7 years after Mussolini took power in Italy, Pius XI reached an agreement with Mussolini, ordering all church officials to stop criticizing Il Duce. Until that point, many staunch Italian Catholics often and repeatedly criticized Mussolini and his policies, especially the fascists' treatment of the opposition, as long as they weren't atheistic communists. This was a coup in heavily Catholic Italy, allowing the Italian leader to press on to secure his power and eliminate his enemies without worry of church criticism. In 1870, shortly after the unification of Italy, the new government seized ownership of the Vatican and the lands around it. 1929, Mussolini gave it back, and the world's smallest country, Vatican City, was born. Despite the image of Mussolini that lingers in the public consciousness, that of a boastful buffoon, he was not, at least when it came to power politics in Italy. He successfully used terror and the threat of mass violence to take power. He used the power of the state and the secret police to remain there, which meant that many of his opponents disappeared or left the country. That meant that Pius XI and his closest adversaries knew that to continue running their affairs, they would have to give Mussolini what he wanted. And what he wanted was for the Pope to order the Catholic clergy to stop criticizing him, at least in public. The Catholic Church and Catholic beliefs are two of the foundation stones of Italian society today, though much less so than before World War II, and in 1929 people listened to the Pope, they didn't just hear him. So when Pius XI secretly ordered his people to stop speaking and writing public criticisms of Mussolini and his fascist party, they did. In Italy especially, and in Catholic-dominated Bavaria in Germany, the place where the Nazi movement began, ideas about society and culture often came from the church or church influence, and they were exceedingly conservative. In the 1920s and early 30s, many people in Italy and Germany viewed the changes in society with alarm and disdain. Jazz and style from the United States, along with a post-World War I wave of sexual experimentation and increased calls for women's rights in the larger cities, frightened many conservative rural and older adults, especially within the upper reaches of the business classes, who were also eager to limit labor unrest and the influence of atheistic communism that was surging in the parts of Western Europe at the time. If you were to listen to all of Hitler's pre-war speeches, you would find that some topics in his speeches were regularly referred to, such as how he and millions of others in Germany felt about the Versailles Treaty that ended World War I and how Germany needed to rearm to defend itself. He would often tell one group one thing and another group almost the exact opposite. In other words, he told people what they wanted to hear. In Protestant-dominated northern Germany, he talked about reducing the influence of the Catholic Church in local and national government, cutting the number of Catholic schools in the country, and making the church pay its fair share in taxes. In Catholic southern Germany, he spoke to crowds and groups of Catholics, including clergymen, about how the socialist Social Democrats were working to eliminate the influence of the church in Germany, including eliminating the schools South German parents sent their children to, and how the millions of communists in the country were threatening much more, the elimination of religion altogether. Hitler and many of his closest inner circle were Bavarian, and most of them had grown up Catholic to one degree or another. Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SS from 1926 on, modeled much of the structure and ritual of his dreaded henchmen on the rituals and rules of the militant Jesuit order, which had sent thousands of monks and priests around the world to spread the Catholic faith by force and attraction. This meant they knew how to speak to the worries of both Catholics and non-Catholics alike. And in the final free election in Germany before Hitler came to power, the Nazis, while they didn't pick up most of the Catholic vote, picked up enough of it and others to become the most popular political party in Germany by more than double their next competitor. 6 months after he came to power, and 4 months after the German parliament, the Reichstag approved the Enabling Act, allowing Hitler to assume emergency dictatorial powers, and he began to deal with his enemies. First on his list were communists and influential members of the Social Democratic Party around the country. The first Nazi concentration camp, Dachau, just outside Munich, opened on March 22, 1933, and the first inmates were overwhelmingly political. Still, several outspoken Catholic clergymen, most of them local priests, were rounded up as well. Others were threatened, either privately or fairly openly. What's more, Hitler's rhetoric was often filled with violent imagery and promises to root out Germany's enemies, whoever and wherever they were. Pius XI had seen precisely the same thing in Italy and was determined to come to some agreement with Hitler before he made a move against the Catholic Church. In 1933, Hitler did not yet have the popular backing or the power to openly and directly attack the Church. He could not risk alienating the millions of conservative Catholic voters and Catholic industrial magnates who backed him or who might revolt against his regime if he did. So, for both Hitler and the Pope, and completely different reasons, agreeing was the better option than blood in the streets. Pius XI reached agreements with Hitler, Mussolini, and other nations, not all of them authoritarian, and by the mid-1930s was aware that any agreement signed with Mussolini and Hitler, especially, was a mere scrap of paper. Still, Pius and others in the Catholic hierarchy and believers around the world, especially in the United States, hoped that the publicity surrounding these agreements would deter the dictators from taking violent action against the Church. To a degree they did, but Pius knew he had to make a deal with the devil when it came to Hitler, and he watched as the Nazis began to terrorize anyone thought to be against them, priests and pastors, intellectuals and artists, socialists and communists, labor unions of any kind, youth groups, and with increasing intensity until the war began, the Jews of Germany. In 1931, Pius wrote an encyclical, an address delivered to Catholics all over the world on matters of importance, condemning the fascists' attempt to replace God with Mussolini and worship of the state. In 1937, he issued another, condemning Soviet atheism. But his most notable encyclical addressed growing human rights abuses in Germany and the Nazis' persecution of organized religion. This encyclical was issued originally in German, rather than the usual Latin, and was an address not just to Catholics, but all Germans. It was titled Mit brennender Sorge, usually translated into English as With Deep Concern, but the literal translation is With Burning Anxiety or Worry. Pius XI knew that the situation in Germany was getting worse every day. In the encyclical, Pius condemned the racism of the Nazis and their institutionalization of prejudice in the law, the movement within the Nazi Party towards old German pagan traditions, which Hitler and Himmler hoped would eventually supplant Christianity as the belief system of Germany. In Germany, Nazis and extreme elements within a small minority in the Protestant clergy in German organized the Deutsche Christen, German Christians movement, within the wider and biggest religious group in the country, the German Evangelical Church, and aimed to change it from within with new rituals, the inclusion of the swastika, and other Nazi symbols in church, and in particular, to teach that the Jews were the arch enemy of both Germans and Christianity. Though their impact was not as significant as it seemed before and immediately after the war, Nazism did have an effect, at least temporarily, on the practice of religion in Germany. The relatively few men and women of faith who did speak up, from the pulpit, with friends or in writing, were often thrown in a camp, many never to be seen again. In his encyclical to the German people, though neither Hitler nor any other Nazi was mentioned in the address, Pius XI condemned the worship of the Nazi Party and its leaders, and called for people of conscience to take action against the regime, no matter how small or whether it would ever be known. Though Hitler and the Nazi hierarchy were reportedly enraged by the Pope's letter, no real action was taken, or rather, the same things that had been happening continued to happen. But what Pius feared, a violent, nationwide purge of the Catholic Church, never happened. Looking back, that was unlikely to happen. Catholics comprised a third of the German population of 70 million, and many influential and skilled German generals and other officers were Catholic. Records show that the Nazi leaders were more concerned with how the German public would meet their growing persecution of the Jews. They were not going to add the wholesale persecution of the Catholics to the mix, at least not until the war was won. So the Church and the Nazi regime played nice, especially in Germany. Like most people everywhere at the time, many wanted to keep their heads down and not attract attention. And attention from the Nazi Party was never good. One of the men who knew very well what was happening inside Germany was the Bishop of Munster, Clemens von Galen. In July and August 1941, Galen gave a series of sermons condemning what the Nazis had hoped would remain a secret, their T4 euthanasia program, which was killing the mentally infirm and other helpless people with disabilities in secret facilities throughout Germany. When Galen confirmed what was happening through his many sources within and without the Nazi Party and among his parishioners, he gave 3 sermons that fully detailed and condemned the T4 program. The outcry against the program surprised the Nazis because they had been preparing the German public for this sort of thing for years. Still, they were forced to call a halt to the T4 program, at least for a time. And by 1941, they had gotten something much more important to them than just the deaths of a few useless mouths. The SS staff at the T4 hospitals had figured out how to execute people on a large scale, with no real evidence left over. Many of those involved in the T4 program, administrators, doctors, and nurses, went on to staff the death camps, especially at Auschwitz and Treblinka. Galen was a powerful and influential man who survived the war, though he spent much of it under close Gestapo scrutiny. Unfortunately, the legacy he built with his 1941 sermons didn't last. As a matter of fact, he left out what the Nazis were doing in Germany and elsewhere, the persecution and deportation of the Jews to the east. The phrase the Nazis used to lull the German population into thinking that the Jews of Europe were being sent to live in new places in Poland and the conquered parts of the Soviet Union. By 1941, Galen and the new Pope, Pius XII, who replaced his namesake on his death in 1939, knew what was happening to the Jews in Europe. Catholics from Poland and from within the German army had reported what was going on in a variety of ways. In 1941, the Nazis were killing the Jews of Poland and the Soviet Union with bullets, not gas, and some of the massacres happened in broad daylight near population centers. In Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, the Babi Yar massacre, which claimed more than 30,000 victims, was witnessed by not only the Germans doing the killing, but also German soldiers who wanted to watch, as well as a large number of German civilian officials and Ukrainian civilians. And Babi Yar was only one of the thousands of killing fields where the Special Action Squads, or Einsatzgruppen, killed at least 1 million people before the gas chambers of Auschwitz began their grisly work. Sadly, Galen, while not a man who called for the murder of the Jews, did not speak out against what he knew to be occurring. Before and after the war, Galen made a series of anti-Semitic statements and remarks, accusing the Jews of heresy and their resistance to Christ as contributing to the anarchy and chaos. The Catholic Church and the Jews. Even in hindsight, it seems almost impossible that the people of Germany and those looking on from foreign lands did not believe that, at the very least, Nothing good was going to happen to the Jews of Europe while Hitler dominated. Hitler's writings and speeches, as well as the speeches of many other Nazis, both high and low, were full of threats and denigrating comments about the Jews. Posters, newspapers, movies, radio shows, and newsreels all sent a strong message that the Nazis believed that Jews were vermin in both Germany and elsewhere. As Hitler became more secure in his position and gathered more and more power unto himself and his cronies, the Nazi Party moved gradually towards what would become the Holocaust. Among those Germans of the World War II generation who did not willfully close their eyes to what was happening have said that before the Kristallnacht of November 1938, they still thought that at some point, for a variety of reasons, Hitler would eventually ease up or stop passing laws against the Jews. But after the events of Kristallnacht, they knew that things were going to get much worse for the Jews of Germany. Unfortunately, at a time when, perhaps more than at any other time in history before or since, the Catholic Church, especially Pius XII, could have decided that the cause of humanity was more important than their safety and wealth. But they did not. Pius was not an evil man, nor was he a saint. And while there is, without a doubt, much to be said about many deeply religious Catholics throughout Europe, occupied or not, who did not stand by and watch an abomination like the Holocaust happen, Pius was involved in many humanitarian efforts during and after the war involving Jewish refugees and survivors. But as an organization whose entire purpose was to spread the gospel of love, the Church fell far from the mark. The lack of institutional focus on a massive and evil problem and the Pope's silence on the subject during the war were all witnesses to this. Though the Pope heads the Catholic Church, practices differ in parts of the world. Moreover, bishops and archbishops who oversee large regions of their countries have a great deal of leeway in dealing with problems in their bishoprics and archbishoprics. In France, church officials initially kept silent about some of the anti-Jewish laws passed in unoccupied Vichy France. But after the notorious Val d'Hiver stadium roundup of some 16,000 French Jews and Jewish refugees, the French church began to raise its voice, publicly denouncing the policy of deportation and the Vichy government's role in it. In many cities and towns, clergymen aided the resistance and in several cases hid Jewish people or helped them escape to Spain or across the Mediterranean. In Croatia, church officials, including nuns, were involved in running a subcamp in the notorious Jasenovac death camp, run by Croatian fascists, and the site of the murder of at least 100,000 people, mostly Serbs who were Eastern Orthodox and Jews. In Slovakia, Father Josef Tiso was Hitler's puppet. Tiso was involved in many crimes, including collaboration with the Germans in the deportation of Slovakia's Jews. And within the Catholic Church and the Vatican hierarchy, there existed an institutional anti-Semitism that had been passed down for centuries. And to the effect of anti-Semitic feelings in much of Europe before World War II was even on the horizon. And you have the potential for silence and even outright collaboration. Long before World War II, anti-Semitic narratives had been woven into church doctrines and pronouncements. The accusation placed on the Jews that every Jew in the world was somehow complicit in killing Christ fueled centuries of mistrust and violence. Additionally, church leaders often turned a blind eye to, or even tacitly endorsed, anti-Jewish policies and rhetoric emanating from secular authorities. During the Holocaust, the response of the church hierarchy was complex, confusing, and often inconsistent. While some individual clergy offered refuge and spoke out against Nazi atrocities, the institutional stance remained largely muted. Pius XII faced criticism for his perceived silence in the face of widespread Jewish suffering. Some historians believe that this reflected a fear of jeopardizing the Church's survival under Nazi persecution, while others see it as a moral failing. There were many brave men and women of the Church who risked and, many times, lost their lives to save Jews during the war. One of the most famous is Father Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish priest and monk. What he did is courageous beyond belief, and what happened to him is horrifying. Father Kolbe was sent to Auschwitz for his open criticisms of Nazism in his sermons. The fact that the Nazis saw his monastery as a potential center of resistance, and in a final insult to the Nazis, Kolbe, who was an ethnic German, refused to put his name on the Deutsche Volksliste, a list which gave ethnic Germans in occupied territories a wide range of advantages and privileges. He was sent to Auschwitz I, the notorious work camp famed for its cruelty. There, he volunteered to take the place of another inmate who was being sent to the dark underground bunker to die of starvation. As he was being taken away, another inmate, Franciszek Gajowniczek, cried out for his wife and children. Kolbe ran to his side and implored the guards to take him in Gajowniczek's place, which they obliged. Kolbe and 3 other men of a much larger original group survived 2 weeks without food and minimal water. Kolbe and the other men were given lethal injections. He had led the men in the cell in almost non-stop prayer. Today, he is a saint of the Catholic Church. Mother Maria Krystyna Budzinska was a Polish nun of the Congregation of the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Warsaw. Budzinska saved many Jewish children by hiding them in her convent school in Warsaw. She forged documents, bribed officials, and disguised the children as Catholic orphans, risking her own life and those of her fellow sisters. She saved over 200 Jewish lives, including the renowned pianist Vladimir Ashkenazy. After the establishment of Israel in 1948, Father Kolbe and Mother Maria were declared righteous among the nations by the Israeli government. Rat lines. Unfortunately, many men in the church sympathized with the perpetrators and helped them escape justice, at least temporarily, by assisting them to secure Vatican and diplomatic paperwork and new identities, and helped whisk them away to countries in Latin America which had large German population like Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. After hiding in Europe for a time, sometimes with the help of Catholic officials, they went to the Middle East and were helped by many newly established Arab nations, all of whom were vehemently anti-Semitic. After the war, some Catholic Church officials, including Bishop Alois Hudal in Rome and Bishop Antonio de Castro Mayer in Argentina, facilitated the escape of Nazi fugitives via clandestine networks known as rat lines. Their motives ranged from ideological sympathy to offering refuge for persecuted Catholics in Nazi Germany. Estimates vary, but hundreds of fugitives likely benefited, including Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust, who escaped to Argentina with Hudal's assistance. Another infamous Nazi escapee was Franz Stangl, the longest-serving commandant of Treblinka. The Church's involvement remains controversial, raising questions about potential complicity and missed opportunities to bring war criminals to justice. This has been History on Fleek. Thank you for joining us today.